Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and we're getting ready for the Vuelta because it's starting on Friday. Guys, we got an exciting Vuelta. Ton of riders that have won massive amounts of Grand Tour stage wins throughout their careers. I got a total of 14 Grand Tour stage wins listed with 8 riders here at the Vuelta starting. If the start list continues the same as it is at this point in time on this Monday, just before the Friday race starts. Now, of course, the big headlines in today's Monday news is Primoz Roglic, Jumbo-Visma, 3-time back-to-back-to-back winner here at the Vuelta the last 3 years in a row. He is signed up and ready to go. He says he's going to start this year's Vuelta in 2022 and try to make it 4 Grand Tour wins at the Vuelta, all consecutive. Now, nobody's won 4 Grand Tours in a row until we go all the way back to Miguel Indurain when he won his Tour de France's 4 in a row at that point in time. So, when we're looking at this Grand Tour here at the Vuelta starting, we got some big competition, though, with Primoz Roglic, because remember, he had a devastating crash on stage 5 of the Tour de France that left him with a lot of back issues. He did that magnificent battle against Tadej Pogačar with the help of his teammate Jonas Vingegaard on stage 11 of the Tour de France. That changed all of the Tour de France stages from that stage 11 all the way to the finish of this year's Tour de France when Jonas Vingegaard won this year's Tour de France. Now, after Primoz Roglic dropped out, a few stages after that, he's been in recovery, and he hasn't had a ton of practice time to get ready for the Vuelta, but he's probably had enough because he's Primoz Roglic. If he's starting this year's Vuelta, I got to believe I have him down as my #1 favorite here at the Vuelta. But if any of those lingering injuries haven't recovered 100% since the Tour de France, I'm going to throw my #2 rider as Remco Evenepoel. So if Primoz Roglic isn't #1, Remco Evenepoel goes down as my #1 bet here to win the Vuelta a España. Problem is, though, when we're talking about Remco Evenepoel for the Belgian rider, he's on fantastic form, but he doesn't have a lot of experience, and he's a really young rider. When we start looking at the riders wrapped around the quick-step rider, his #1 help's going to be Julian Alaphilippe, and Julian Alaphilippe's had problems throughout this whole year. Remember the LBL, he went down hard and crashed, and then he came back later in the season, long time, missed the Tour de France, started Tour de Leon and stuff, and finished that race, but not spectacular, but still at the front, and that was his first big race. Is coming back here for 2022 season. He did catch COVID and came back before Tour de Leon, but he had to drop out of that race, and then, of course, since Tour de Leon, he's been bringing his form back up here for Quick Step. That'll be the big helper when we're talking about Remco Evenepoel. Now let's go back over to Jumbo-Visma because Primoz Roglic has some help of his own here, and he's got big help in the form of Sepp Kuss, the American rider. We know Sepp Kuss has gone big. He went top 10 in last year's Vuelta, was big help for Primoz Roglic to win that 3rd Vuelta. Now he's got some other guys backing him up in the form of Sam Omen's there, Chris Harper's there, Rohan Dennis. Rohan Dennis is there, and if Rohan Dennis is on fine form, Rohan Dennis might be Primoz Roglic's #1 helper here for Jumbo-Visma, but Rohan Dennis has gone through a little bit of problems too, because at the Commonwealth Games, after winning the individual time trial, he was taken to the hospital for some checkups, having some pain issues, but now, here he is getting on the list to start at Vuelta a España. And remember, Commonwealth Games was, I believe, about the 7th of August, so he hasn't had a whole lot of time to prepare, but we know he was on great form because he was winning the individual time trial before he dropped out and went to the hospital soon after that. So when we look at Jumbo-Visma, they got a couple sprinter guys there because they got Edoardo Affini that's strong on the flats, can help look after Primoz Roglic through these flat stages up in the Netherlands. And remember, it's a team time trial on stage 1. 23 kilometers long, so you want some power. You want guys like Edoardo Affini on the team, and of course you want guys like Mike Teunissen. These 2 riders, they got big power. They can do big damage in the team time trial because sprinters are always strong when you're talking about 23 kilometers worth of a team time trial. The reason why, normally they can't, sprinters aren't great individual time trials, but in the team time trial, they can sit on the wheel, recover, then they can do big power on the front, come back and recover again. They're not great individual time trials always, but when you look at riders, comes to my mind anyways, Mark Cavendish, that was a rider that big-time sprinter, best sprinter in the world, probably ever in the cycling world. And when you see a rider like that and he can do team time trials, that tells me that all these guys, when you're talking about Edoardo Affini and Mike Teunissen, you know there'll be a big help on the first individual time trial when we're up in the Netherlands. So Jumbo-Visma got a stacked team. If Rohan Dennis is 100% healthy, Sepp Kuss, if he's coming on good form from the Tour de France still, and of course Primoz Roglic with his incident at the Tour de France on stage 5 on the cobblestones. If he can recover from that, we're going to look for Jumbo-Visma being the #1 favorites. This year's Tour de France, packed with teams. I got at least 6 stacked teams that can give Jumbo-Visma a run for the money, that all have big-time hitters and guys that have a shot here at winning the Vuelta a España. Those 6 teams, I'm going to list them right now, are going to be Jumbo-Visma, of course, Quick Step, Ineos with Richard Carapaz, Bora Hansgrohe, Jai Hindley, the Giro d'Italia winner this year, UAE Team Emirates from Joao Almeida, and Bike Exchange Simon Yates. If you guys remember right, we go all the way back to the Giro. Bike Exchange rider Simon Yates put on a fantastic show in the first individual time trial, I believe right, stage 3 I think it was, when he won that individual time trial but then bumped his knee on stage 4 or 5, had problems with that, still won a stage, that magnificent circuit stage of the Giro, and after that stage though, he dropped out of the Giro and went home with 2 stage wins. When it looked like after that individual time trial, he was the big GC favorite to win the Giro d'Italia. Now he's starting here, and he's won the Vuelta before, so he has some history. Bike Exchange team doesn't look incredibly stacked when we're talking about going into the mountains, but Simon Yates been on very good form already, winning races and winning stages here right up to the Vuelta a España starting. Now, he did lose, though, the Classica San Sebastian, the individual one-day race, to Remco Evenepoel after the Belgian rider rode everybody off his wheel. Now, when I look at the pictures of Remco Evenepoel, on that race for Classica San Sebastian, he looked incredibly leaned out, and I think he's taken his level up to another notch. Now, one thing, when you start the Vuelta, it's always hard to tell where the riders are, but when the Vuelta starts, there's always riders on form. There's no doubt about that. It's my favorite of the Grand Tour races. The Tour de France, of course, is the big show, but now when you compare the Vuelta to the Giro, I always prefer the Vuelta because you normally could get all the riders through the early stages, and then when we get into the mountain stages, you see a lot of mano-a-mano attacking each other, and we see big-time battles going up these final climbs when we were talking about at the Tour of Spain. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. The Vuelta starting on stage 1 this Friday, so it's going to be soon. Tune in, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next edition of Beyond the Coverage.